Today's video we'll be taking another look at our AMD K5 machine, and very specifically the Rendition Verite graphics card.
We review old technology from games to old PCs, and don't forget the thought. Cleaning their bones, get ancient electronics. We cover it all.
And this is the graphics card in question we're going to be looking at today. And this is an interesting card, and I think I'm pronouncing it right, the Rendition Verite or Verite card.
I eventually learned it's actually pronounced Verity.
The thing about this card is it was a player in the mid-90s when you had all these competing 3D accelerator cards with their own APIs and ways to do 3D acceleration. This card was a competitor, and there's some interesting things about it. It had very good image quality for the time, at least the first iteration comparatively. We'll talk about that in a minute. But some other significant things as well. This is the first card that Quake officially supported for 3D acceleration, V-Quake. So this was the first card that, there was a version of Quake that it officially 3D accelerated. So it's a significant card, but if you put it into YouTube and you do a search for it, there's virtually nothing on this card. There's not really any reviews specifically about this card, at least that I was able to find. There's just really nothing very in-depth with this card. No one really talks about this card.
And full stop right there. So any of you longtime watchers on my channel know that I've mentioned that I do this before. I will get a part in, or I'll start a project and I'll shoot some video for it, and then I'll either temporarily lose interest or I'll hit a roadblock where I need to wait to find or buy another component to complete the video. Well, that's what happened to this video. So I shot the first part of this that you're watching right now maybe 6 months ago. And what I just said there is true. At that time, 6 months ago, from this point now, early July 2021, there really wasn't much about this card on YouTube. As far as like information videos, there was gameplay videos and there was some light stuff. There wasn't any good videos. Well, in that time period between me shooting this first part of this video and now in editing, someone, put some videos out. Actually, there are two videos that were put out that were pretty good, like overview review videos of this card. Apparently it's for something called GP June. It's like, a lot of people that do retro computer stuff put out GPU oriented videos. I kind of wanted to get this video out for June, but I just couldn't get it out in time. But yeah, since I recorded that first part, there actually are some good videos out specifically on this video card. So after you're done watching this video, if you're still interested in some information, check out those videos. They are on YouTube now, and you can find some good videos. Some of them go into a little bit more technical stuff, so very informative. So yeah, check that out. That's also watching those videos is also where I happen to learn the correct pronunciation for this card, unless those videos are incorrect. And if it is, I'm sure you guys will tell me like 50 times over in the comments.
There's a couple good reasons for that, but it's still, despite its shortcomings, which we'll talk about, it's still a significant 3D acceleration card, and there were a number of games that directly support its 3D acceleration API, both in DOS and Windows. So it's interesting that this card is never really talked about. So I'm going to briefly go over this card here. Now I am pairing it with our AMD K5 PR166. Not really any specific reason other than I think that makes an interesting pairing, and I have that computer handy. This is the PCI version. There were AGP versions of this card. This is the Diamond Monster version. It's kind of a rare card, except for the Diamond Monster version, which was the most common, but the other versions, the AGP versions, and the original variation of this card, which we'll talk about, they can go for a little bit more money, since I guess they're kind of collector's items. So there were three versions of this card. There were the V1000, I believe, that's the first version. Then there's the V2100, which is this version, and then there's the V2200. The only difference between the 2100 and the 2200 is speed. And These cards for Diamond, these use the V2100, so these are slower, but later on Diamond released a BIOS update for the card that pretty much turns it into a V2200. I don't know the RAM count off the top of my head, so I think it might be 4 or 8 megabytes. I'm not 100% sure. I believe the first version maybe came in 4 and 8 megabyte. We'll have to double check the RAM amount on this card. The other thing about this card, which I think it's interesting to pair it with the K5, is it's supposed to complement well with weaker CPUs. So socket 5, socket 7 CPUs, this card should complement them pretty well from what I've read. Some of the negatives about this card is it has horrible 2D DOS performance. Terrible. At least right out of the box. They did release a little program you could run in DOS, I believe a little TSR that corrected most of that and sped things up a little bit. And we'll see, we'll try to run some benchmarks and look at results with and without that little program if I can find it. But that was one of its big weaknesses. A decent card in most respects in Windows, but in DOS and 2D VGA modes, it was just so slow. It was like an ISA card, really, as far as like speeds go. It was just really bad.
So I'd just like to interject again here from the editing room. When I did talk about its slowness in DOS and in VGA modes, now that is true for games that just use regular VGA or MCGA modes. It was horribly slow, like ISA speed slower even then. We'll talk about that in a minute. But I want to point out that was only games that used regular VGA or MCGA modes. Games that use like VESA modes, I believe 2.0 and up, it actually was fairly capable card in those modes, speed-wise. So again, only games that used regular VGA mode, and especially games that used X mode. So Doom is a good example of a game that used this X mode for VGA, and it was just really slow in that game. And the utility that was put out does not fix it in games like Doom. So just be aware of that. I just wanted to clear that up.
Like I said, there were little patches and little programs that fixed that from what I've read. We'll experiment with that a little bit, but this is really a Windows card. And there were a number of games that did support the API for this card. So we'll take a look at them. We'll take a look at a variety of different games that support this card. It also has pretty decent image quality. The first iteration, the V1000, for its time, I believe it came out in 95 or 96, not 100% sure, but it had really good image quality. Now, the second one, like this one, had decent image quality too, but by then its competitors have kind of caught up and surpassed it in image quality, but it was still decent image quality. So let's put this card in the K5 machine. Let's just see how it does. We'll look at it in Windows. We'll try to look at some games that support its proprietary API, and then we'll see how it does in DOS. So here's the card. We got a full feature connector here. This little diamond multimedia sticker, if we take that off, it will say something like Rendition Verite, and then V2100. 1997 date on this, RAM, chips, and if we do look on the back, this is a 4 megabyte PCI version. There were, as I said, there were AGP versions of this card, although I don't think any from Diamond, and this one's the 4 megabyte. I'm pretty sure there was also an 8 megabyte RAM version. Alright, so before we start talking about the card more, I thought it'd be good to go over the machine that this card is going in. Even though we've sort of gone over this machine in the past in my AMD K5 video, at least one of them. Anyways, yeah, as you see at the beginning of the video, here's the case. It's very yellowed. I like this case. I like how it has a 3-digit LED, but like the plastic part here has like a crack down it. It's not too bad when it's on. You can't really notice it that much, but it's kind of peeling off, not in the best shape, very yellowed. This case does have some corrosion, and it is bowed in the middle, though it doesn't really seem to affect it very much. But with this build, I really tried to go with a 1997 build from 1997. Now, I'm going to reiterate again, a lot of times when people are testing video cards and they're kind of doing a video card video, they put the card in a really overpowered machine, usually one that wasn't available at the time. And that's just so there's no bottlenecks and you're just looking at the max pure performance of the cards. I like to reiterate whenever I do a video where I'm looking at a specific item that I generally don't do that. I like to put the machine in a machine of its era. So there might be bottlenecks, but I think it really kind of illustrates how the card worked in its time. Although elements of this maybe aren't completely strictly from that time period, so just keep that in mind. But I think we did pretty good on this machine. I think this is pretty much all from kind of that 1997 era or earlier. So here's the Verite card. I forget, it's a PT 2006 motherboard with an Intel chipset. I think this is the Triton 2 chipset. No AGP, this is just socket 7, PCI and 16-bit ISA. Now for the CPU, what I have in here is a AMD K5. If you don't know much about the K5, look it up. There's some really good videos on the K5. I've done a couple in the past as well. Like, very good performance. It still is behind the Intel offerings on like FPU, but in general operations, it's usually faster than the Intel speed equivalent. It's a really cool chip. Anyways, mine, it's a 166 megahertz, but I've actually overclocked mine to 200 megahertz. And they did make an official 200 megahertz AMD K5, but they're ridiculously rare. So this one's been overclocked to 200 megahertz PR rating.
I would like to point out that it actually wasn't very stable. I think in the future I can fix this with playing with the voltage a bit. I didn't have time at this point, but I did return it to its regular PR 166 megahertz from the overclock, so I did have to undo the overclock.
We have Coast on a module, 512, 512K of L2 cache, I believe 64 megabytes of EDO RAM, I believe. This is a USB card. It's specifically supposed to work for Windows 95, which I have on here, hence the time period. But even with the USB supplemental drivers installed stuff, the device manager says it's working fine, but I can't get it to recognize anything. We just have a Sound Blaster 32 here. It's not an AW card. It's one of the Sound Blaster 32s, which is basically like the AW 32 with some minor differences. I forget the CT number on it, which I can't seem to find here. I think it's CT like 3620. It's really nothing special. And lastly, I believe we do have one of those Bigfoot drives in here from the time. I think this is from 97. I think this is the 2 gigahertz or 2.5 gigahertz model, and it works fine. It's kind of slow. I hear they're not super reliable, but they're cool. They're so big. It's just, I don't know. I like them for some. I just kind of like them. They're kind of different, and yeah, it's pretty cool that I picked this up at a swap meet and it put it in there and it worked, and it's pretty cool. It meets the time period. Like I said, I don't think it's the slowest drive, but they're certainly not the fastest. But yeah, it's cool to have that in there. At least I believe the earlier ones, they had some issues with like reliability. With the reliability, maybe speed. But this one does fine. So yeah, that's our machine.
And just to be safe with our Bigfoot drive, I did run a full surface scan with ScanDisk, and it passed with flying colors.
So I would like to say I finally have found some USB drivers that work with Windows 95 fairly well. These drivers were given to me by a friend, and I'm finally seemingly able to use my USB mass storage drive with Windows 95. So I don't know where he got these drivers, and I'm not sure he exactly remembers where he got them, so I can't leave a link with you guys. But they're like, I believe the file is called like XUSB drivers, and it's for Windows 95, specifically OSR B or the OSR 2 and they work really good. Now, I had to use a USB card, so they also work with USB cards, and the first card I had in there, I think it was like a CMD based card, it did not work with. But I had another NEC USB 2.0 USB card, PCI, and I installed that and it worked fine. Like, these drivers work great with that card. So yeah, I wish I would have had these drivers earlier. They would have made my life much easier. This will make it a lot easier for when I'm working around with like Windows 95 machines, because usually you go with Windows 98. Usually I go with Windows 98, just a better operating system. But sometimes, especially for that period correctness, you want Windows 95. And I did slap on a nice rendition card on this machine. Now, it doesn't look great with the yellowing of this case. I do have plans for this machine, so at a later date, I may, you know, peel this off and retro bright it and then put this sticker back on, because I think it would look a lot better if this was like the original beige. It just doesn't look good with the yellowing, but I just can't do that at the moment. So that's cool. Remember, this sticker, among with others, can be picked up on eBay from Geekenspiel. So look him up for all your high quality case badge sticker needs. I just find I like putting stickers on these cases. I think it adds a little bit of, I guess, flair. But it also helps if you're like me and you have 50 million different computers. And a little embarrassing to admit sometimes, but sometimes when you get a little older, mixed with the fact that you have like a billion different computers, sometimes it really helps to put a little badge on there so you know what's in the computer. Because I hate to admit, there has been a few times where I'm looking for a specific video card and I'm like, where did I put that? Where is it? And I'm going through boxes, and I installed it in a machine at some earlier date, a year earlier, and I just forgot about it. But is this sticker on there now? I'll be like, oh, hey, my rendition card, it's in this computer, and then I can get it out. Unless, of course, at some point I replace it and leave the sticker on there, and then that causes another mess. But yes, very useful and very cool, and it adds a nice little flair to your cases.
Alright, and here's a quick graph I put together just to illustrate. I did some benchmarking. Now, most of these benchmarks are done when I had the 200 megahertz overclock, and most of them seem to work fine, and I started getting issues, as you can see, with Quake. I started getting errors in Quake. It just wouldn't work at all with the Matrox card, and then when I tried it with the rendition card, it worked sometimes, it didn't work others, and then when I started messing around with Windows, I started getting way more issues with instability. So I did do a round of tests with it, well, at least with the rendition card, back down to 166 megahertz. But I just want to point out most of these tests are done with the overclock that I previously had. So yeah, I tested a couple cards. They're all PCI except for the Trident card. Well, I only tested 3 cards, but one is the Trident 8900C, and then I did a Matrox Millennium, very fast 2D card, and then of course the rendition card. So yeah, you could see here in the first test with 3D Bench, they're all pretty much equal here, except for the Millennium card, which just obliterates everything else. I don't even know how to say it. I mean, but as you can see here, the Trident card is faster than our rendition card. Not by much, but it is a little faster, and not much difference at all between 200 and 166 megahertz. Now, PCP Player, this is at 640 by 480 resolution. You can see the Trident card really struggled with that benchmark, 5.4. Millennium at 16.4, and then the rendition card actually not too far behind. And again, not much difference between these two. Then we go on to Doom, Max Detail. Now, this is the one that infamously the rendition card is not going to be good at, but it did exactly the same as the Trident card. So we got 12.8 FPS with Doom Max Detail on the Trident, and then with the rendition card 12.8. So exactly the same, and barely negligible difference with the between the 200 and the 166 megahertz CPU speed with the rendition, and the Millennium just blows everything away, 76.5 FPS there. So Quake, again, I don't have anything with the Millennium card because it would just crash. But I did get a little bit of the benchmark. I didn't get the FPS, and it was running pretty fast. Quake with the Trident card, we actually got 17 FPS, and then with the Rendition we got 20, and then again it's maybe like 1 frame less with 166 megahertz. Now this is with the software rendering. This is not using the special API, and we'll talk about that in a moment.
So you can take this with a grain of salt for sure, but I just wanted to show you guys this because I was looking through my little booklet here and I found this. So I don't do it as much anymore, but I used to write down all my benchmark findings in this little notebook. So I have a ton of benchmarks, and very early, this is like maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and I did some benchmarking with Rendition card right here. Now I don't know the benchmarking like versions exactly, so I can't tell you that. So again, take it with a grain of salt. But I know from what I recorded here, this was done on a Gateway 2000 in DOS with a Pentium 120 megahertz Pentium. So I think it was the same amount, around 64 megabytes of FPM RAM, and it says 2200, but that's a missed thing by me. It's a 2100. It's the exact same card from Diamond. And like you can see where I was comparing it to a Mach 32 and a Trio 64, 2 versions of the Trio 64, and a Trident Providia, and all these numbers. It's just look at Doom 12.1, and then with the Trio it's like 50.71 and 4660 with the ATI. I guess this is an ISA, an ET 4000, Doom 1860. Yeah. So it's a little bit faster on the ISA card. So yeah, just a little bit more just to show you guys that this thing in DOS and regular VGA modes, a lot of these benchmarks with DOS 2D, it's just terrible. Now, like I said, there is a little program that was put out to help correct this problem, although I believe it does not work with Doom or those Mode X games. But yeah, I just thought this was neat to show you guys. This was done, like I said, like 6 or 7 years ago. And just take it with a grain of salt, but I just thought it was fun to show you guys my scribblings from years ago.
Okay, I wanted to talk about a couple of utilities for the Rendition card. First is Ren Util, and basically it is supposed to like remap the VESA settings, so those games that are real slow with this card in VGA or MCJ will run normally or faster. It seemed to work when I ran the utility, but I thought it was a TSR, but I couldn't find it in memory anywhere, and none of the speed of my games in the benchmarks changed, but maybe it was just the games I tried in the benchmarks it just didn't work with, but that utility is out there. So another utility is called DMA Look. Now the Rendition card transfers data over the PCI bus with a DMA Busmaster. It depends on your motherboard if it will work or not. It worked on mine, but I've heard especially some of those PCI 486 socket 3 boards, it just will not work because the spotty DMA abilities with those. But it seemed to work on mine. Okay, so I did want to run just a couple random DOS games with this card just to see how they worked. And the first one I tried was Commander Keen and Goodbye Galaxian. Interesting, there was no like stuttering that you get with some cards with this game, where the screen kind of stutters, and it can be an issue. I know like some of the ATI Mach 32 and 64 cards it has an issue with, but Commander Keen ran pretty good and pretty smoothly. So yeah, no issues. Looked like a good, vibrant image as well. So yeah, I didn't have to use like the little VGA fix in the program or anything. Smooth scrolling. The next game I wanted to try was Blake Stone, and again, not really any issues. I mean, these are pretty simple games. This one and Keen are earlier games, so I don't think they require too much computing power from either a CPU or a graphics card or video card, so I'm not too surprised, but perfectly playable, no issues whatsoever, good crisp image, and no like real glitches or anything like that. most of the time when I do encounter glitches in these videos, it's from an issue with my capturing or the capture device, and I'll let you know if it's not. But yeah, the game was perfectly playable, no issues, looked really nice. So I wanted to move on to Doom. Now this is the original Doom. It is playing under DOS, and I'm not using the special VGA fixing utility with it. And it ran abysmally in my benchmarks, like 12 FPS, slightly more than that, but not good. It was really bad in the benchmark. But I wanted to try it in just actual gameplay, and actually just loading up the game and playing it in DOS without the utility to speed things up. It was perfectly playable. I didn't have any issues. I mean, I guess maybe it felt like the slightest bit sluggish, but I mean that might even just be in my mind. I really didn't have any trouble just playing this game. Now that could be because the CPU is a fairly powerful CPU for running Doom, so it's probably, you know, maybe picking up all the slack here. So that doesn't necessarily mean this is going to be a good card to throw in your much slower. I mean, I don't know how well this would run on, you know, like a Pentium 66 or a Pentium like 75 megahertz. But probably still perfectly playable, though, to be honest. And I mean, this card doesn't seem to really function very well in socket 3 boards with 46s anyways, so... Alright, so here we are running Quake, the original Quake on this machine. 166 megahertz AMD K5 with the Rendition card, and it runs okay. I think 18.5 FPS. We're not hitting our 30 FPS, but you know, it's not horrible. Playable or not, I guess that depends on who you ask. Some people have lower tolerances for lower frame rates, but let's take a look at the Rendition version of Quake, and it's the first 3D accelerated version of Quake. So here we are running the same resolution and same benchmark for V-Quake now, using the Rendition API for 3D acceleration. We get much better speeds with the same system at the same resolution. So we're getting now over 30 FPS. So very nice bump in speed and image quality as well. And then here we have the game running in V-Quake, so the Rendition proprietary 3D accelerated mode, and it runs very nicely. You can immediately tell a difference in visuals. Yeah, and the game just looks, the textures look better, just the 3D modeling looks a little bit better. It just is a better playing game. Now this was the first 3D accelerated version available for the original Quake. Now eventually they came out with GL Quake. I believe maybe some other versions, I'm not 100% sure, but I do know there's GL Quake. Most of the time I hear people say that, you know, GL Quake looks and plays better than V-Quake. I haven't played GL Quake for a while, but I think that's probably my opinion too, although I've heard some people say that they actually do prefer V-Quake in certain aspects. Now V-Quake also does some, like, a weird kind of underwater effect as well in Quake, and I don't recall off the top of my head if GL Quake does this same effect, so it might be an underwater effect like unique to V-Quake, but don't quote me on that. But yeah, V-Quake is, you know, not a bad version of Quake to play if you'd like. I guess one thing I didn't notice with my little bit of playing of this version is something like walking up on, say, like the nail ammo crates with the NIN 9-inch nails label on them. It would be blurry, and then you'd get close and it like would pop in, like the texture like pop in and be really clear all of a sudden, which was kind of weird. Didn't really do that in the software version. I guess in the software version it was just kind of a blurry mess the entire time. But in this, the Rendition version, like I said, it was kind of blurry, and then you get close and all of a sudden it would go pop and it would be like really clear and crisp. So that was a bit weird. Yeah, for whatever reason my capture device, when I was capturing it in software, it looked fine, but when I was capturing V-Quake, it like shifted the image up and to the right, so it's cut off a little to the left. It's cut off a little left and up, but when I raised the resolution, it looked fine, so it's an issue with my capturing at low resolution for a multitude of issues. And with that said, we can take a look at the benchmark at a little bit higher resolution and see what kind of frame rates we get. And here's the time demo at 640 by 480 in V-Quake. Alright, now let's take a look at the original Tomb Raider. First off in software mode, and it's just kind of pixelated-ish, and it just, I mean, it looked okay for the time, but it's a little hard to look at now. So, well, let's take a look at the Rendition 3D accelerated version of Tomb Raider. And here we are, and it's an immediate difference in like the textures, and just looking at Laura's model, it's just a much smoother, you know, the ground, everything looks a lot sharper, a lot better looking version. Another thing I always like looking at is the pool in Laura's home. Now here, this is the software version, and it's clear. When you go underwater, it gets kind of like a bluish tint, but when you're on the top, it's clear. I like looking at the pool because different cards, I've noticed, like render the water differently. And now here is the rendition version of Tomb Raider, and immediately the water has this kind of teal, like cool blue look to it. It kind of stays consistent when you go underwater. And on the surface, in software mode, it was clear on the surface, but it still has that blue, cool, reflecting sort of look with the rendition version of Tomb Raider. So I like how it does the water in this version. Now, I did run into some glitches with the Rendition Verite version of Tomb Raider, and they were mostly in the form of these little, like, magenta or purplish lines I'll show you in a minute. Now, there is a program called a V2 DOS Fix that, you know, some of these games, I believe, like the original Tomb Raider, were meant to work with the original Verite card. And so when you're using on a V21 or 2200, you may get these little issues. So I ran the program. It looked like it worked. I guess it's possible that it didn't work, but even after running the little patcher program, I still ended up seeing having the glitches in the Tomb Raider, and you can see them here. They're like these little magenta or purple lines, which I don't believe you would get those if you were using the original rendition card, the V1000. But with the later cards, apparently it looks like you'll get issues with this, and I don't know, maybe the patcher didn't work right for me, but it just didn't work. And I think the last game we'll take a look at here before this video gets too long is Whiplash. Now this is the retail version, and there's a little patch available. You can get it at the Vogan site. I'll show you in a minute here the link in the page that I'm talking about. But there's a patch for the retail version available to get the rendition version. But what you're looking at right now is the software version of Whiplash. It's a pretty cool DOS racing game. So here is like the intro to the software version, and now I'm going to run, I don't know what you call it, Whiplash. So we'll be looking at the rendition version of Whiplash here in a minute. Now, interestingly, with this version, when you load up, you get a little Gremlin Interactive logo that I don't recall seeing with the software version of Whiplash. So playing right here is the rendition version. I keep saying rendition because I keep forgetting how to pronounce it correctly. Verite, I believe, card. The Rendition Verite version of Whiplash. And in the intro, when the game starts and you get this automatic intro running, it also appears to be different as well when you're using the rendition card as opposed to software mode. So I believe it does look a little smoother. Looks like it's probably playing a little bit faster. I may be seeing a couple different effects from the software mode. So if you're interested in finding other games that support the Rendition proprietary API, you can go to the Vogan's page. They have a section, it's under Marvin and then Video and then 3D accelerated cards. So it has a list of a bunch of cards that aren't 3DFX cards that have like different games that are 3D accelerated by them. So there's a whole list of the Rendition, the games that support Rendition proprietary API. They even have lists of games that were supposed to work with the card but kind of been debunked and they don't actually have acceleration. And usually there's links to next to the games that lead you to the patches and various information. So it's very, very helpful if you're interested in looking for more games that the Verite card supports, or Veritite, or however it's pronounced, card supports, or any other 3D acceleration cards. So before we wrap things up, I just wanted to show this card working under Windows real quick in the drivers. Now I'm just using the stock Diamond multimedia drivers that kind of came with this card. There are other drivers available that may help your compatibility with games and whatnot and speed, but I'm just using the stock Diamond drivers here. And now they reported my card to be a turbo, and I thought maybe that meant maybe someone along the line upgraded the BIOS on this card to a 2200 to make it a little bit faster. But I ran Power Strip, and I couldn't confirm that, because when I ran Power Strip, it actually initially said V2200, but when I went to look at the speed of the memory and the core clock speed, they were all at stock V2100 levels. So I'm just going to assume this card is a stock V2100 rendition card. Now, I did try to run Final Reality with this card, but I got a no 3D or direct 3D hardware rendering platform found. And I mean, I've run into that before. That's kind of a common issue with some of these early 3D accelerator cards. Although I guess this one, the 2100, isn't that early, 97. It seemed to find 3D graphic options when it did load up, but I don't think it was using the card. I've looked on the internet, and it looks like it might be a driver issue. I think I read somebody did get it to work with Final Reality by using a different driver version, although I didn't try to play around and see if this actually worked or not. But when the Final Reality did run, it was a slideshow. So it was pretty horrible. But like I said, I don't think it was actually detecting the card, which was kind of expected a little bit by me. Now, 3D Mark 99 Max did seem to detect my card again as a turbo in parentheses, and it did run the benchmark all the way through, but it was really, really slow. Although interestingly, the first test with the little spacey race car things, usually with like weird early 3D cards, accelerator cards, it will be missing textures and things, but it will run okay. This one, it looked like all the textures, or at least most of them, were there, but it just ran like really poorly, like 1 FPS. But it did complete, and the score was pretty bad. But yeah, I'm just happy it completed the test. Yeah, I mean, the 99, 3D Mark 99, it's really not meant for like a 97 card to be running on it, but it did complete the test. Again, I don't know if the tweaking or different drivers will help, but this is what I got. Alright, now let's finish this video up. It's already been a little bit too long, but we'll finish it up now. I just want to also point out that there are two different versions of the API for the rendition cards, one for DOS and one for Windows. So that's kind of, I don't know if that's particularly interesting, but yeah, it does support, like directly support Windows and DOS games sort of separately using a different API on the same card. Now what you're looking at here, I found some interesting, I guess, demos for the rendition card here. So we're just going to finish up by just taking a look at these demos running. So what do I think about the card? I like this card. I'm going to keep it in this machine. I mean, this machine already is kind of weird for the time, but I'm just going to keep this as like a 1997 build. I'm going to keep this card in it. It's going to be a rendition machine. I think I will retro bright the cover or the case when I get an opportunity to, and I think I'm going to change up the sound card. I might try to test some weird sound cards in this build. I kind of like it. It has a certain charm, this machine. But to the card specifically, yeah, I do like it. I wouldn't say it's the best choice. If you're building like an all just straight DOS machine, now we've seen in this video it will play DOS games even though it has issues with speed. I guess especially if you have a more powerful CPU for playing DOS games, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. The image is good, but there's so many better choices. Now for like Windows 3D acceleration, it's a decent choice. Again, there are better options that are faster or support more games, but this game actually supports a decent number of games, or I would say a decent number of games support the proprietary API of these rendition cards. You'll run into some issues with compatibility depending on if you're using like an older V1000 or a V21000 up. So just keep that in mind. But there is that fixer program, although it didn't work for me. But yeah, I don't know what else to say. It's good image quality, better choices out there, but it is a very interesting card. It does things in an interesting way. I think V-Quake looks really good. I've never played Quake all the way through, but I might play it instead of GL Quake. I may play the V-Quake version all the way through. But yeah, decent card, worth checking out. I wouldn't spend too much money on one, but yeah, I hope you enjoyed this look at the Rendition. Oh geez, I forgot how to pronounce it. I'm sure even with the correction I made earlier, there's going to be a million comments about the correct pronunciation. Verite, I don't know. For whatever reason, I can't remember the correct pronunciation. But yeah, decent card. Yeah, hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one.